talk about parent-child relationships and through the lens of trauma. And so I'm going to put up a definition of trauma, and I want you to have a read of that and just take 30 seconds to think about how that relates to our current situation and the last 2 years of living with the pandemic. And so when we think about this as a definition, I think we can all agree that the experiences that we've had collectively and individually over the last 2 years could be considered and is considered by most and many a traumatic experience. And it's ongoing, not only for ourselves, but for our children. And as adults, we have fully functioning frontal lobes, which means that we're able to control our emotions most times. But I think even the best of even those of us that consider ourselves to be pretty regulated are struggling at times with being able to regulate our emotions. And so we know for our children who don't have fully functioning frontal lobes yet, because it's not developmentally appropriate, are really struggling with that. And so today I wanted to talk about improving parent and child relationships through the lens of trauma. Way back 14 weeks ago, when we first started these sessions, we talked about trauma-informed parenting, and we went through the SEAT acronym. I did some digging and looked around for other articles from sources that are close to my heart, which are those that come from the United States. And I found an article, which is going to be the basis for today's session. And it was written by this woman called April Brown. And the article is titled, "Why We Need Trauma-Informed Parenting More Than Ever." And her quote, a quote that I've pulled from the article, is, "When we parent from a trauma-informed lens, we recognize the impact of trauma on children and respond to them in ways that do not perpetuate trauma. Instead, we center on love, connection, healing, and liberation." And right now, when the stress continues to mount and we're still in distance learning and the normalcy of life has not returned as we hoped it would, these are the ways that we can rebuild or continue to strengthen our relationship with our children in the face of these continued struggles. This session is going to be a little bit interactive, I hope, in that I'm going to ask you to type some things into the chat or unmute and share if you feel comfortable doing that. And so one of the ways that you can help your child and have a trauma-informed lens on your parenting is to create joyful experiences. And that my little robot with the funny fingers was a nod at that, is that we can find small joyful moments in our everyday life. And that may be breathing with a silly GIF with your child, an out of the blue tickle for no apparent reason other than you need to see your child smile and connect with your child. Dancing, throwing on a song and dancing with your kids to a song that maybe they've never heard before, and it's your favorite, and having a laugh. So it's trying to find those moments of joy, and sometimes we need to find those in the midst of the most stressful times. Thanks, Memory. Dancing seems to be top of the charts. And if you have access to a pool, a family swim could also be a really good. The next one is to internalize the positive. So our brains are absolutely amazing, as we all know. One of the things that is amazing about our brains is that we have negativity bias, which means our brains attune to the negative points of any given experience. And then they expand those or highlight those. So unfortunately, those become the biggest thing that we remember in any given situation. There's a lovely book called The Importance of Being Little, and the author talks about taking children out on a nature walk for 2.5 hours, and they see the wonders of the woods and they experience all these wonderful things. And as they're walking back, one of her students stubs his toe. And so for that student, the whole experience was awful because his toe hurt, when in fact, that was about the last 3 minutes of their experience. And so right now, this can be even more difficult, is focusing on the positive. But there are some things we can do as a family and to continue that connection with our children, which is to make time to point out the positive. And so Neil's example of going for a walk outside with your child and maybe a pet is you can reflect on that experience with your child and you can say, gosh, that was a really good thing that we did today. What was your favorite part of being outside and going for a walk? And you'd be surprised what your child picks up. They may just say, it was being with you. It was you holding my hand as we crossed the street. It was the sun shining. It was not being on Zoom. It was a number of things. And then you can focus in on those positive moments and really highlight those. So even though there may have been some negative moments throughout the day or moments of tension, we can try and override those a little bit with positive experiences. And again, with the ... I know that we all have routines in our lives that help focus on the positive. If you could pop some of those into the chat. One that I'm familiar with and that we use is just a gratitude routine. So in the evening time, whether you're eating dinner together or it's a quiet moment with one child, just sharing something that you were grateful for. And it doesn't have to be something you were grateful for about being with your child. It can be something from your life outside of them so that they understand you seek and find gratitude in all spaces. It may be my colleague smiled at me today and that just brought me a moment of peace, or I was really happy to walk outside. So it's modeling for your children again, and that helps create that connection in that space. We talked about this a little bit, which is we're all looking for a sense of control right now over a situation that, for the most part, we don't have any control over. We all know that if we could, our children would be in school right now, and we wouldn't be having this session because Danny and I would be teaching our lessons and our children would be in school learning. However, we don't have control over that. And so our children feel even more out of control than we do. And one way that we can create that connection and improve our relationship with our children is to go back to that shared decision making. So finding spaces and places and things and times during the day where you can share the responsibility with your child. And some suggestions here are planning and cooking a meal together. So standing next to each other in the kitchen and your child's grating the carrots, or they're chopping, or they're cleaning up, but they're there with you and they're helping, and they've decided some of what is going into tonight's or today's meal. For younger children, it can be you turn over, you relinquish the control, and you say, I want you to choose your clothes in the morning. Always in mind that if they're not ready for that yet, you can say, I'll be there to help you. And so I know that parents are doing a lot of this already. So again, additional suggestions from the parents in the room on how to help relinquish a little bit of control in the house so that your children have some control over making decisions, helps them feel less stressed when they have more control over what's going on in their lives. The next step or the next part is to co-regulate with your child. So right now we know that that times are a bit more stressful and we may see more dysregulation from our children the further we get away from what was their norm. However, we want to remember that we're looking for the story that our child's behavior is telling. And in order to do that, we need to be able to regulate ourselves. So the picture that Danny showed last week of the child on the ground flailing around, and what we've been talking about is what happened before that. Being a behavior detective. What happened to my child? Are they tired? Are they hungry? Are they disappointed? Was there something they were looking forward to that didn't happen? And being aware of that before we react. And staying calm with our children, being able to listen and to acknowledge what's going on for them rather than joining them in that experience. So while we may want to sit down and have a nice long cry with our children because we're really stressed out about what's happening, we still need to be there to help them co-regulate. So it's saying, I see that you're upset. Do you want to talk about that now? And if your child says, no, I don't want to talk about it right now, then acknowledging that, okay, I see that you need some time, but I'm going to be here if you want to talk about that, or I'm here if you need a hug, or I'm here if you want to hold my hand, or if you just want to sit with me for a little while. And that also helps your child begin to learn what works for them, because we know not all of the same strategies work for every person or every child. The second part of that is to teach calming strategies. And that's why we're constantly going on about deep breathing, because all of our children may not access that right now, but hopefully they will remember it. And in the moment of panic or stress, they'll be able to access that. And that's why we're constantly practicing it, because we know that diaphragmatic breathing, which is that long exhale, actually affects the way our brain responds to stress. And we can calm our brain down physiologically through taking nice deep breaths. And so that's why Danny and myself are constantly doing this in our guidance lessons and reminding teachers, and many teachers are doing this in their lessons as well, so that your children are getting a lot of practice in ways to calm their amygdala, to calm the stress center of the brain. And then shifting away from seeing our children's behavior as a way to get our attention. Instead, it's a way to connect with us. At times now, especially since a lot of us are at home with our children for a greater portion of the day, and we're seeking our own independence, it can feel that our children's attention-seeking behavior is getting more and more and more and more, because as we need more and more space. But if we reframe that and we think about, my child is trying to connect with me right now, and again, go back to being a behavior detective, we can shift from reaction into reflection. Okay, well, what's going on with my child right now, and what might they need from me to re-regulate so that we can get on with our day? And that may be a hug. It may be a 30-second conversation. It may be a bit longer. You need to go outside. It could be getting a drink of water, but it's getting into that space where you can co-regulate with your child and help them reflect on what's going on and help move them beyond that dysregulated state. And then moving forward together. And so that may be walking up the stairs, holding hands together to get back on that Zoom lesson. It may be sitting next to your child for a few minutes while they figure out what materials they need to be organized for that next lesson. It may be taking a break after their session to talk about something that has nothing to do with school or just whatever is interesting them. And so as we look at that, it's really important to remember that in order to help your child co-regulate and in order to be able to focus on connection, we ourselves need to regulate. And that means you're getting enough sleep, you're eating healthy foods, you're exercising on a regular basis. There's a lot out there about not doom scrolling and reading the news excessively. That's for every adult to decide for themselves, but trying to find a balanced, healthy lifestyle so that you're able to be there for your children. Danny is the one that usually finds the Calvin and Hobbes cartoons, but I took it upon myself as a challenge, maybe a birthday present, Danny, to try and find one that matched this week. And this is the one that resonated with me. And so your children have no assurance that the parenting isn't screwing them up. And we as parents have no assurance that what we're doing is perfect. But if we focus on love and connection and healing and liberation, and we think about our relationship with our children being paramount, being the most important and precious thing that we have during this time, I think we can't guarantee it, but we can move closer towards healing and repairing and strengthening the relationships that we have with our children. So when life returns to whatever version of normalcy comes our way, we know that we're going to come out stronger on the other side. So your homework for this week is to find at least one moment of joy. Sing, dance, walk outside, feel the sun on your face if we see it in the next couple of days. Find one of those, at least one moment of joy. And regulate yourself so that you can help your child, and focus on taking care of yourself so that you can take care of them. I'm linking the article, Why We Need Trauma-Informed Parenting Now More Than Ever, and it goes into a bit more detail than I have in this session. And then another great article from a resource out of Australia called How We Can Cultivate Joyful Moments. And this article isn't focused on the pandemic, but it is just about ways to find more joy in our lives. And we know that that helps with trauma-informed parenting.